everybody, it's Doug Green, and I'm the publisher of Technology Reseller News. And I'm very pleased to have with me today Hartland Ross of eBridge Marketing. Hartland, thank you for joining me today.
Doug, thank you very much for having me on the show. Really appreciate it.
Well, we're going to be talking about one of our favorite topics here is mergers and acquisitions. We're actually going to be leaning on the acquisition part a little bit more than the merger part today. We're going to be talking about how to actually buy your first MSP, what's involved. We haven't really explored that as much as in the past, talking about maybe preparing your company for sale. So we're going to be looking at it from a different point of view, but so I want everyone to stay put and hear more about this. But first, what is eBridge Marketing?
So, Doug, we started in 2001, shortly after the dot-com boom, and we started as a marketing company for IT firms, and we cut our teeth in the web hosting space and infrastructure, data center operators, and so forth. And we're supporting those companies for many years, supporting organic growth. And then we added on MSPs into that process as well. But the interesting thing was that we were finding that as time went on, organic growth was sort of stagnating to some degree. It was becoming more competitive and certainly far more expensive. And groups were coming to us asking for alternative ways to grow, particularly around acquiring other companies that might be interested in having a conversation. And so initially it was somewhat informal, putting some of these conversations, these groups together, but it soon became apparent that there was more to it than just a few individual groups, and that there was really a large market for consolidation. And so what we saw happening in the hosting space is sort of now been happening here with a vengeance in the MSP space. And so we've been operating as a M&A advisory firm now since about early 2000s, I guess, after we started our marketing firm. And we have two divisions. We have eBridge Marketing, which is our marketing agency side, focused on organic growth. And then we have the M&A side, which is our sites, the MSP broker and the hostbroker.com.
You know, before we dive into some of the particulars of that buying process, one thing that strikes me is the continuity of your story, which is you have been specializing in markets that historically have been misunderstood or a little understood by a lot of people, especially in the financial sector.
Yes.
You know, that's a tough one, isn't it?
Well, especially in the early days when you were going to banks and they just didn't understand the revenue model and this concept of recurring revenue, and at this point it's kind of the holy grail that everybody's looking for.
Right.
And there's a lot more understanding of it, a lot more appreciation, and frankly probably security from a lender's perspective around the annuity stream that comes with these businesses. Of course, some have more recurring revenue than others, but yeah, it's as these businesses have all grown, they've grown to the point where they've attracted, as you said, the financial buyers. In the early days, they were all just too small to attract really anybody's attention.
Yeah, for people that didn't have the experience, you'd try to educate a banker about all this, and then they would say, okay, so how many pickups does the company have? How large is the acreage? So yeah. And stuff like that.
Yeah, and tell us about your office and the fact that, geez, well, everything's virtual, and the customers are not on contracts or on subscriptions, right, and so forth. So a lot of water has gone under the bridge since those days, but certainly it was a struggle in the early times.
So yeah, let's move forward to our moment here, and let's imagine for a moment that in 2025 you're considering the idea of buying your very first MSP. And you've brought with you today some ideas. There's like a step-by-step approach to this, I think.
Well, everybody's at a different point, and some have done acquisitions already. Others are on their first one. One of the things that we're seeing is that there are far more buyers in the market than there are sellers, and so it becomes a competitive situation to try to secure an opportunity. And for those who are saying, hey, I've got this great idea, I'm going to grow my business through acquisition. I'm going to roll up some MSPs, and they hear that, geez, if I do that, the values will increase. It all sounds great, except for the fact that everybody's got the same idea. And so how do you differentiate yourself as a buyer relative to all the other buyers that a seller is having to evaluate? We heard just the other day through some partners of ours that they had, get this, 400 NDAs on one deal. I mean, it's just astounding to think that your chances of getting a deal in those instances are so low. And secondly, you're probably going to end up having to overpay for it. So you really need to stand out, and obviously money is a big piece in this process. But in my view, there are some other elements that we see consistently that are kind of lacking that I thought I could talk a little bit more about if you're interested.
Well, I sure am, because I think the first one we're coming up on is something that doesn't involve money necessarily.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, there's the early stages, right? And one of the things that we see is that groups come and they say, well, they see an opportunity, it looks of interest, but they really don't know what to do next. What's the next step? And of course, they need to sign a non-disclosure and they need to get access to the information. But the point is that they don't have any kind of process. So they haven't spoken to any kind of professionals on their end. They don't have a CPA or an attorney that they're working with. They haven't figured out what their due diligence questions are. So it ends up being a process where they're sort of winging the whole thing, and it comes across to or may come across to sellers exactly in that way, where it's just they're not instilling confidence that they know what they're doing, and certainly in all likelihood haven't done other deals, and that in and of itself, especially if it's a competitive environment, will put that buyer at a disadvantage. So one of the things that we talk about is just have an established process. Even if you haven't done this before, think through the process, have your resources, your team in place, and put together a due diligence list and timelines associated with it. But really, more importantly than all of those things is understand what you want. What's important to you? What are the non-negotiable issues? And some examples are customer concentration. Obviously, it's not ideal if there's 2 or 3 large customers, but it doesn't mean to say that it can't work. But is that a factor for you? Customer churn numbers, the profile of the customer. Are they enterprise customer? Are they more of an SME? Is there an industry specialization? How much revenue is recurring? Are the customers on contracts or not? Geographically, where are they located? What are the price points that they're generally used to paying? So all of these things, there needs to be real thought, and I think that there's a lot of buyers that kind of come into the process just trying to figure it out, and in some cases, it's going to put them at a disadvantage if they haven't got those ducks in a row.
Now, early on, one of the things you said when we were preparing for our podcast today is the building of trust.
So this is something that I've spoken about many times, and it's something that I was talking about at a conference here in November. And I really think that a lot of times deals fall apart based on trust, and the trust needs to go both ways. The buyer needs to feel that the seller is candid with them, that there's no skeletons in the closet, that the information as presented is being presented at least in good faith. Doesn't mean to say that everything's 100% accurate. Sometimes it isn't, and sometimes information changes. But if there is a change, that the seller needs to be forthcoming with that information. But similarly, the buyer needs to instill trust as well. So hence my point here about having an established process. Talking about financing, being transparent about where the financing is coming from, any sort of contingencies and timelines associated with that, especially if you're using external debt financing, particularly the SBA process. But really, trust kills deals, and so the other one you've probably heard of is time kills all deals. And so if a buyer and seller feel like they kind of can't trust the other, it starts to put into question virtually everything, and particularly if there's going to be an ongoing relationship post-close. For instance, the buyer is going to hire the seller, or at the very least, the seller is expected to provide what's referred to as transition support. So it's not just here are the keys and good luck with it, but being able to support the buyer for some period of time. And so the relationship is a marriage of sorts, a marriage that may not last more than a few weeks or a few months, but at the same time, if there's an employment relationship, it could last years, and that won't stand this test of time if the foundation of trust is not there.
And building that foundation, you told me earlier before we began, has to do with the due diligence you were discussing just a few minutes ago.
Yeah. So again, understanding what you're looking for and being clear, because it's a bit like going to a job interview. The person interviewing is going to say, well, why do you want this job? Why do you like this industry? Why do you want to work for us? And the answer needs to be something that is believable, and there's conviction behind the response. So why do you want, as much as there may be the belief that, hey, I'm the buyer, I'm the one with the money, this is my decision, and I'm asking all the questions. Essentially, I'm the interviewer. It's actually, that's true to some degree, but the tables are turned as well. Certainly, at some point, a little bit further into the process, where the seller is also evaluating the buyer to decide, well, is this someone that I want to sell to? And one of the things that I think is underappreciated is that a lot of times, as much as the much as the times the seller wants to receive top value for their business, actually one of the bigger factors typically is I want to find someone who can take care of my baby. This is a baby that I gave birth to. I've been supporting these customers. I have employees that I care about. They've brought me a long way to build this business, and I want to have somebody who can take care of both of those. And so again, if they don't feel that the buyer is the right fit, it may be irrelevant, frankly, what the purchase price is if they don't have confidence in them.
And that gets back to the trust. So what I'm hearing again and again is there are hard things, money, process, due diligence, and so on. But then there are human, if you will, things like I need to be able to trust you. But the one is sort of dependent on the other. If I'm giving you real numbers, but also if I'm feeling good about your ability to manage my business and provide good experiences for my customers, employees, and so on.
Exactly. And I'll just take it a step further and just say that one of the common structures, it's not certainly with every deal, but is this idea of an earnout meaning that the seller will get paid contingent on something happening. Typically, it's going to be a revenue target of some sort. So as long as your revenues stay where they were last year, then we'll pay you. If they drop, then we'll pay you something less, and there's a formula associated with that. But to the extent that there's a seamless transition and that the seller's employees are well supported and happy, then you typically will have happy customers. And when you have happy customers, you have customers who are going to stick around, which means that your as a seller, your revenue stream is protected, and therefore your valuation is protected. So they do relate to each other. And if you take it, sort of step further to say that if you sell to somebody who's not competent and who's not a good fit, but has a top dollar offer, if there's any kind of contingencies around this, that you actually may get less simply because of the fact that there's not going to be a fit, and you're going to lose revenue and people and customers and relationships and so forth.
Now, you were saying just a bit ago that there's a speed involved, that if you take forever, that as the clock ticks, the deal unravels. I take it.
Yeah, so it's important to keep the ball rolling, and the challenge with any buyer and seller, frankly, as well, is that both of them are focused also not only on this job of buying or selling the business, but the other job, which is I need to continue to run my existing business. So the seller needs to continue to run their business status quo. Hopefully they sell, but maybe they won't, and come to terms. and the buyer needs to continue to run their business, obviously. And so, particularly in a situation where it's an owner-led business and the owner is wearing multiple hats, and whether it be the buyer or the seller, and so they're involved in decisions, things happen, right? There are fires, there are outages, there are issues, and
Yep.
if are sort of distracted going, and also there's personal life, right? We all have whether it be holidays or whatnot that are coming into play as well. And so if it takes you 3 weeks to turn around a review of an agreement, that's just another 3 weeks in the process. And could it be tolerated? Potentially, if it's a one-off thing. But if it kind of keeps happening and due diligence takes forever, and some of the sellers spent the whole weekend, and I've seen this happen, they spent the whole weekend uploading files that the buyer wanted, literally hours and hours of their time uploading to some data room, Dropbox, Google Drive, or a data room situation, and they can tell who's open what when, and they notice that the buyer a week later hasn't even opened any of the files that they just spent all weekend rushing to put forward. It's a bit of a slap in the face, because it says, hey, why did I spend all that time and waste my weekend running around to try to get all this information? You guys can't even be bothered to take a look at it.
Now, is there a way to get everything aligned? I know you can't give away the whole story of what you do, but are there processes to align the objectives and valuation in terms of the deal term?
Well, I mean, we certainly, and most advisors would run a process. Some are more strict than others. So, part of that process is to start with these kind of deal killer questions from a buyer's perspective, right? So, again, if a buyer knows what they want, then we're focused in on trying to give an example. Let's see, going all the way through the process, and then late in the day finding out that the price points are not compatible with the buyer's price points, and so we can't move that $75 a month customer to a $250 a month customer overnight, and the gap is too big, therefore we're not interested. Well, that was information that was provided virtually on day one, or should have been. And so there's no point in us having spent the last month or two going down all these other rabbit holes to find something out as obvious as that. So there is a process, yes, and the idea is to try, frankly, for both sides to decide as quickly as possible whether there's something here or not. The other thing is that if the deal looks like it's potentially could go off the rails, or there's some issue, that's our job, is to jump in and say, look, we have concerns over list. Let's talk about this, and not have that elephant in the room be sort of ignored.
Is there a point where it's something to avoid, that the process becomes so elaborate that it starts to actually drain the life out of the companies? Fatigue sets in.
Well, I mean, absolutely. I wouldn't say that's a regular occurrence, but sometimes we get an overzealous buyer who has done what they feel is a great job putting together this massive laundry list of due diligence items that they need, and they lob it over the fence to the seller, and the seller just sort of deer in the headlights looks at this thing and says, oh, this is far too much. I can't even process this. And so they have the best of intentions as a buyer, that they want to kind of have no stone unturned. But you also need to recognize that depending on the size of the business, some of those things may not be relevant. And so you need to have almost a sort of a scaled down version that's appropriate for the deal size. So take your due diligence list and whittle it down to the things that one, are relevant for the deal, and two, to have a sort of a phased approach, right? So these are the things we need now, and then, hey, if we're still interested, then phase two will come into play, and you can provide those items. So that way it ends up being more manageable, and also, if there's going to be an issue, let's discover those things earlier on.
So, Hartland, I really want to thank you for joining me today. There's never enough time to talk about this topic, because it needs to be said for many people. You said it during this podcast. It's not just some money. It's not just an asset. You're not selling or buying a car. which itself can be actually rather emotional. Actually, this is your life. You said the word baby, right? You have maybe you're buying it possibly from someone who's poured their soul into it, their creativity, maybe even their own name identity. So it is a big deal.
It's absolutely a big deal. One thing that I could also note as the flip side, just to your point here, is actually on the seller side, is understanding what the seller's motivations are and what they want to do next. Because if they don't have a plan, then sometimes they can get cold feet rather, because they get nervous about. They wanted to sell, but they haven't actually got a kind of a life transition, and so for retirement, it's a bit of a shock. So understanding what their motivations are and ensuring that that they have their own sort of next chapter, I feel like, figured out.
Well, Hartland, I understand you've got 2 places where people can find more resources on this.
Yeah, so we publish a list of companies for sale in the IT services space, and obviously MSPs is a big area for us. But mentioned we really cut our teeth in the hosting industry and infrastructure space. So we publish all of those types of listings of companies for sale. MSPs, really a North American focus, hosting and infrastructure companies on a global level. And we publish those to our site, thehostbroker.com and the MSPbroker.com. We do that every week. Typically, it goes out on Wednesdays. It's free to subscribe. So if you're interested in doing so, you can go there. We also have the ability to take your requirements, your requests. If you said, I want to look at opportunities in certain states or within certain mileage of a major center, then we can take those requirements as well as revenue targets and then add you to what we call our wish list and reach out to you if and when we have opportunities that we think are a fit for you. If you are looking for support or have questions, we're also happy to chat. Obviously, this is a little bit of a sort of a drop in the bucket in today's session, but happy to chat. We also have a lot of resources on our site in terms of our YouTube channel and blogs and other podcasts we've done.
Hartland, I want to thank you for joining me today. This has been really great. I know this isn't going to be our last conversation on this, but for now, thanks very much indeed.
I hope not. Thanks very much. Really appreciate your time as well, Doug. Thank you.